The snow was falling heavily as Sergeant Silas Morgan stepped out into the street, Valor's feet sinking into the white silence beside him. He had envisioned a warm reunion, laughter, his daughters running into his arms. Instead, the door swung open, and two little girls in pink dresses were pushed out into the cold, shivering snow. The door slammed shut, echoing. In that moment, as the twin girls burst into tears, clinging to Valor's fur against the storm, Silas knew this was more than just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of the most brutal battle of his life. Snow came down in great silent sheets, turning the narrow suburban street of Anchorage, Alaska, into a hushed white corridor. The houses, modest two-story structures with sloped roofs weighted by ice, stood as if holding their breath against the biting wind. The only sound was the crunch of boots pressing into packed snow and the steady panting of a German shepherd. Silas Morgan walked slowly, shoulders squared, though fatigue shadowed every line of his face. His uniform jacket, though worn and creased, carried the scent of sand and steel from distant deserts. On his left side, tethered by nothing but loyalty, strode Valor, his wartime companion, his sentinel, and his solace. Silas was 38, broad-shouldered and built from years of drills, rations, and unrelenting duty. His eyes were storm gray, the kind that rarely softened, but tonight they flickered with an ember of hope. He had survived ambushes, midnight patrols, and the loss of friends whose names were now etched in stone. But the thought of coming home to family, his wife Marlene, his twin daughters Ellie and Sophie, was what had kept him standing in the heat of foreign nights. He pictured warmth spilling from the windows, laughter, little arms around his neck. That image had been his anchor through years of dust and silence. Valor was a striking dog, 5 years old, black and tan fur dense against the cold, ears sharp as if tuned to a frequency beyond human hearing. He was no ordinary pet, but a trained military dog, a tracker whose instinct had once saved Silas from stepping on a buried IED. Yet in moments of quiet, Valor was gentle, pressing his head into Silas's palm when grief had stolen his breath, lying across his boots on long, watchful nights. Now as the pair reached the familiar stone walkway leading up to Silas's house, Valor slowed, his hackles stiffening. The dog sensed tension before the man did. The front door banged open, breaking the silence of snow. From within came the harsh light of the hallway, spilling out onto the frozen steps. Silas froze, the fragile picture of reunion shattering before his eyes. Out of the doorway stumbled two little girls, their bodies quaking in the wind. Ellie and Sophie, 6 years old, identical in face but each with her own quiet spark, wore matching pink dresses, thin cotton entirely unsuited for the cutting winter. Their hair-long chestnut waves, tangled from hurried hands, clung damp to their cheeks where tears had frozen into thin tracks. Behind them, framed in the yellow glow, stood Marlene. Her beauty had always been delicate, but now it was brittle, her frame thin, her once warm blue eyes hollowed into something sharp and distant. Dark rings bruised the skin beneath her eyes, as though sleepless nights had drained every kindness she once held. She gripped the edge of the door as if it alone could hold her steady. Her voice, flat and frigid, cut through the storm. "They're yours now. I'm done. The divorce papers are filed. I won't raise them anymore." The words hit Silas harder than any shellfire he had faced overseas. His jaw locked, but before he could move, the door slammed with a crack that echoed off the snow-blanketed houses. Ellie stumbled forward, nearly falling, until Valor pressed against her, steady as a wall. The dog stood broad, chest out, as if shielding both girls with his body. He released a growl low, guttural, protective, directed not at the storm, but at the house that had just expelled innocence into the cold. Silas dropped to his knees in the snow. He pulled Ellie and Sophie close, his large calloused hands trembling as they wrapped around their shivering shoulders. Sophie buried her face into his jacket, sobbing with the broken sound of a child who no longer understood what home meant. Ellie clutched Valor's thick fur with white-knuckled fists, whispering into his ear like one clings to a guardian angel. Inside, Silas's soldier instincts cataloged details he could not ignore. Near the threshold, visible just before the door slammed, he had seen it, a pair of heavy men's boots, leather darkened by melted snow, cast carelessly near the entry rug. The faint shadow of a figure had slipped deeper into the hallway, a stranger in his house, walking freely where he had once rocked his daughters to sleep. Rage surged cold and heavy, not the hot fire of battle, but an iron weight pressing on his chest. But the eyes of his daughters pulled him back from the brink. He forced his breath to steady, brushing snowflakes from Sophie's hair, kissing Ellie's temple. He whispered, "I've got you. I'll never let go." The words were more than comfort, they were a vow, binding him tighter than any oath he had ever sworn in uniform. Valor nudged Silas's shoulder with his muzzle, eyes burning amber in the lamplight. The dog whined low, urging movement. Silas understood. They couldn't stay kneeling in the snow. He rose, lifting Sophie into one arm while Ellie clung to Valor's collar, the shepherd carefully matching her small steps. The street stretched silent and endless, the snow already swallowing their footprints. Silas turned once, looking back at the house. The window curtain shifted, a silhouette watching, faceless, nameless. His stomach clenched. Whatever war had begun inside those walls, he was no longer part of it. And yet the casualties stood beside him, two little girls cast out into the storm. As he carried them down the walkway, memories collided with the present. He recalled the day Ellie had been born first, screaming and fierce, while Sophie had come minutes later, quieter, her eyes wide and calm. He recalled Valor's first mission, the dog lunging forward to drag him away from the humming metal beneath the soil. He recalled Marlene's smile when he had left for duty brave, trembling, promising she would hold their world together until he returned. That smile was gone, replaced by the slam of a door and words colder than ice. The snow thickened, flakes clinging to their lashes, the street lamps glowing halos in the storm. Silas pressed forward, each step a reminder that he was no longer walking into a homecoming, but into exile. Yet even in that desolation, Valor walked tall beside him, ears tuned, eyes vigilant. Ellie and Sophie, pressed against him and the dog, found a sliver of safety in that small circle carved out against the storm. When they reached the corner of the street, Silas stopped beneath a flickering lamp. He set Sophie down gently, adjusting his grip on her small shoulders, then knelt so he could look into both their faces. Their cheeks were red and raw, their lips trembling. "Listen to me," he said softly, forcing calm into his voice. "No matter what happens, we stay together. Do you hear me? Together." Both girls nodded, clinging tighter. Valor sat between them, tail curling around Sophie's boots, his body heat rising like a shield. From the distance came the muted hum of a car engine, tires crunching over icy roads. Silas instinctively pulled the girls closer, eyes narrowing, muscles coiled as if for combat. But the car passed without slowing, its headlights washing briefly over them before fading into the curtain of snow. To the rest of the city, they were invisible, just another soldier, another broken family. Yet to Silas, this night marked a beginning. Betrayal had carved away illusions, leaving only truth. And truth was brutal but clarifying. His daughters were no longer safe in the place that was supposed to be home. Their safety now rested on him alone and on Valor, the dog whose loyalty had never wavered. He straightened, hoisted the duffel bag still slung across his back, and set his eyes forward. There was no plan, no destination, only the determination that he would not let his daughters freeze or falter. Somewhere ahead, beyond the storm, was shelter. Somewhere ahead, he would find the strength to rebuild. For now, all that mattered was to keep walking. And so they did. A soldier scarred by war, two little girls in pink dresses clutching at his sides, and a German shepherd carving a path through snow. A family fractured, but not broken, not while Silas still drew breath, not while Valor still stood guard. The storm pressed harder as Silas trudged down the frozen street, his boots sinking into banks of snow that the wind swept across the asphalt like white sand. He carried Sophie against his chest, her head tucked under his chin, while Ellie clung to Valor's collar, her small legs stumbling but never falling because the dog slowed his pace to match hers. The cold was merciless. Every exhale became a cloud of frost, every breath of the twins shallow and uneven. Silas's arms ached, not from weight but from fear, the kind that tightens every sinew when the thought of losing what you hold becomes unbearable. The neighborhood around them seemed deserted. Curtains stayed drawn tight, doors remained locked against the storm. The world had closed in. Then through the curtain of falling snow, a faint yellow light flickered to life ahead. A porch lamp burned against the darkness, guiding them like a lighthouse. Silas hesitated. Pride told him not to beg at a stranger's door, but the sight of his daughter's blue lips silenced every objection. He quickened his pace, valor tugging forward with a decisive bark. The house was an old log cabin set back from the road, the kind built decades earlier when Anchorage was still half wilderness. The porch was dusted thick with snow, and a rocking chair creaked faintly in the wind. Silas climbed the steps, his knees nearly giving way as relief and exhaustion battled within him. He lifted his fist to knock but didn't need to, because the door opened first. Margaret Hayes stood framed in the doorway, the warm orange glow of a fire behind her spilling across the snow. She was 72, a widow for over a decade, her husband having died of lung disease after years of work in Alaska's oil fields. Her hair was silver white, gathered into a bun that had loosened with the day's labors, and her eyes were sharp hazel, the kind that read truth and lie with equal clarity. Her frame was slight, stooped with time, yet she carried herself with a dignity that defied age. She wore a thick wool cardigan, sleeves rolled to the elbows as though she had been tending firewood. For a moment, Margaret's gaze lingered on Silas. His weathered face, the military duffel, the trembling child clutched to his chest. Then her eyes shifted to Ellie, clutching Valor's fur, and to Sophie's small hands fisted in her father's coat. Finally, she looked down at Valor himself, ears high, stance protective, his breath visible in clouds. The dog did not growl. Instead, he stood still, as if evaluating whether this woman was threat or refuge. Margaret bent slightly, extending a wrinkled hand toward him. Valor sniffed once, then pressed his nose to her palm. That silent exchange sealed the decision. "Get them inside," Margaret said firmly, her voice husky but not unkind. She stepped back, holding the door wide. "Quickly, before they freeze." The wave of warmth as they entered was almost painful, like pins prickling across frozen skin. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke, pine, and chamomile. A fire roared in a stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across shelves lined with photographs of children and grandchildren, smiling faces that no longer visited often since life had pulled them to distant states. A handmade quilt draped over a rocking chair, and on a side table lay a worn Bible, its pages feathered with years of use. Silas lowered Sophie onto a faded couch near the fire, while Ellie sank beside her sister, clutching Valor, who leapt up and curled protectively around both girls. His warm body shielded them, his steady breathing soothing their ragged sobs. The sight tightened something in Silas's chest. This dog had crossed minefields and deserts with him, but seeing Valor serve as a wall of warmth for his daughters was something altogether deeper proof that loyalty could bridge even human failures. Margaret moved efficiently, her hands practiced with the economy of age. She set a kettle of water on the stove, fetched dry towels, and laid them near the fire. "They'll need warm tea," she murmured, half to herself. Then she turned to Silas. "Sit, soldier, you look half dead yourself." Silas shook his head, staying on his feet, scanning the room as if danger might still lurk behind curtains. Old habits died hard. His voice was low, gravel-edged. "Thank you. I didn't mean to impose." "You didn't," she cut in with a certainty that brooked no argument. "No child belongs out in that cold. No father either. Sit." At last, Silas obeyed, though tension held his posture stiff. Margaret sat opposite, folding her thin hands on her lap, eyes studying him the way one examines a letter long overdue. "You've been away," she said simply. "Yes." His reply was clipped, but her gaze urged more. He swallowed. "Deployed. Too long." Her eyes softened. "My husband's brother served. Came home a stranger to himself." "I know the look." She let the silence linger before asking, "And their mother?" The question sliced deeper than the cold had. Silas drew a slow breath. She shut the door, said she's done. There was someone else inside." Margaret's jaw tightened. She nodded as if confirming something she had long suspected. I've lived across from Marlene for years. I heard shouting, nights when the little ones cried, and it wasn't her voice that silenced them. It was a man's. She leaned forward, her hazel eyes glinting with quiet anger. I nearly called child services myself. Silas closed his eyes, every word pressing weight on his chest. He felt Valor nudge his knee, grounding him. When he opened them again, Margaret was watching with the same unflinching clarity. You're not alone in this, she said softly. Not anymore. The kettle whistled. Margaret poured hot water into mismatched mugs, adding honey and chamomile. She pressed one into each girl's hands, guiding them with gentle patience. Ellie sipped cautiously, her wide eyes darting from fire to stranger. Sophie, quieter, leaned into Valor's shoulder, her mug trembling until Margaret steadied it with her own. There, the old woman whispered. You're safe here. Valor shifted, resting his head on Sophie's lap. The twins both stroked his ears, their little fingers threading through coarse fur. For the first time that night, their breathing slowed. Silas watched, and something in him loosened the smallest thread of relief. Margaret rose, retrieving blankets from a cedar chest. She draped one across each child, then handed a third to Silas. He resisted at first, but her arched brow left no room for pride. He accepted it, pulling it tight around his broad frame. The fire warmed his skin, but the ache in his chest remained cold. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, filling the silence. Margaret finally spoke, her voice softer now. I lost my husband 10 winters ago. This house gets quiet, too quiet. Sometimes I forget I'm still here until the wind reminds me. She glanced at the girls, bundled in warmth beside Valor. Maybe God sent you tonight to remind me I'm not finished giving shelter. Her words settled like a balm, though Silas found none to answer. He looked at his daughters, Ellie drifting towards sleep, Sophie tracing circles in Valor's fur, and felt both grief and fierce resolve. He would not let them feel abandoned again. The storm battered the cabin walls, but inside, firelight flickered across faces weary yet unbroken. Silas leaned back, the exhaustion of battlefields and betrayal finally pressing down. He did not sleep, but he rested, his eyes fixed on the slow rhythm of his daughter's breathing and on the watchful silhouette of Valor by their side. For the first time since the door had slammed, the night held a fragile peace. Morning in Anchorage broke pale and cold, the storm's edge fading into brittle blue light. Silas rose stiff from Margaret's couch, his daughters still curled beneath quilts, Valor lying like a dark shield between them. He had not slept, but soldiers learned to carry fatigue like another pack. Today would not be survival, it would be preparation. He thanked Margaret, promised to return, bundled Ellie and Sophie into borrowed parkas, and stepped into the hard air with Valor pacing beside him. Jack Parker's law office was a modest second-floor suite above a tax service. Inside, the decor was spare watercolor landscapes, a coat rack, and the brass plate reading Parker Family Law. Parker himself was in his early 50s, tall, shoulders broad, hair trimmed close and streaked with iron. A former infantryman who had become a JAG captain before turning to family law, he carried the aura of a man who had survived both foxholes and divorce court. His handshake was firm, his eyes clinical but steady. Silas gave his account cold words about Marlene's rejection, the slammed door, the strange man inside. Valor lay at the threshold, ears pivoting with every noise. Parker listened without interruption, then leaned forward. Family court worships two gods, he said evenly. Stability and best interests. You love those girls, but we must prove you can give them safety housing, routine, evidence. The rest is noise. He laid out a battle plan. Secure housing under Silas's control. Keep a meticulous child care journal feeding times, health notes, photographs. Obtain affidavits from witnesses like Margaret. Schedule medical visits to document the girl's condition. Establish Valor's therapeutic role with professional evaluation. This won't be a defense, Parker added, tapping his pen. It's an offensive. We show the court a soldier who became the most stable parent in the room. Housing came first. By chance, Parker's receptionist had a lit ground floor apartment in a fourplex. The manager, Tassi, a Samoan in his 60s with seafarer's hands and a laugh like gravel, looked at Ellie and Sophie leaning into Valor's fur in the lobby. "First month half off," he said simply. "Every child deserves a roof." The Veterans Network rallied without being asked. Sarge Peterson, 68, white hair clipped like parade ground grass, arrived with diapers and a new car seat. He installed it in Silas's truck with the precision of a field radio. Leon, a black Air Force electrician in his 50s, fitted smoke detectors and outlet covers. Arlene, a Latina former Army medic in her 40s, delivered thermometers, children's medicine, and a notebook labeled Day One. "Write everything," she told Silas. "Evidence wins custody." Valor inspected the apartment as if it were a new post sniffing corners, mapping exits. When Sophie whimpered near the bedroom, he pressed against her legs until she calmed. Ellie tested a window latch, reporting her findings like a little scout. Silas logged both incidents with times. Facts became his new ammunition. The next morning, they visited a pediatric clinic painted with sea creatures. Dr. Manguyan, late 30s, calm and precise, examined the girls. "Stress leaves marks everywhere," she said, noting insomnia, clinginess, but no acute illness. She urged routines, the language children trust. Her signed report became another stone in Silas's wall of proof. That afternoon, Parker arranged a visit from Keisha Blair, a certified canine behaviorist and Air Force canine veteran. She tested Valor with a drop spoon, brief separation, and a weighted blanket on his back as Ellie leaned against him. Her notes were clear. "This dog provides measurable emotional stability. His presence is materially beneficial." She handed Silas 2 signed copies. By evening, Margaret's notarized affidavit arrived. Spare, factual, devastating. Nights of crying, a man's voice instead of a mother's, neglect witnessed but unspoken until now. It was the kind of testimony no lawyer could easily dismantle. Through it all, Silas wrote, 6:40 oatmeal with honey. Sophie ate 3/4. Ellie slipped Valor 2 bites. 8:10 clinic visit completed. 11:45, Valor lay across Sophie's legs 9 minutes, crying ceased. He did not record emotions, only facts, because facts stacked up to become floors strong enough for a judge to stand on. When Parker reviewed the first binder of evidence lease agreement, photos of the apartment, medical report, behaviorist's letter, affidavit, daily logs, he allowed himself the faintest smile. "This is the work," he said. "Let them reduce you to bullet points. We'll make sure they're the right ones." He reminded Silas, no direct contact with Marlene. All communication would go through attorneys. "She'll fight in the dark. We fight in the light." That night, after heating burritos and coaxing bath time like a ceasefire, Silas switched off the lights. In the dim hall glow, Valor padded into the children's room, stretched himself across the narrow gap between their beds, and lay still. Ellie's fingers curled into his ruff. Sophie's breath eased into steady rhythm. Outside, wind raked the gutters. Inside, a soldier-turned-father opened his notebook. The war ahead would be fought in quiet entries, affidavits, and measured routines. And it had already begun. Snow still clung to the gutters the morning Silas buttoned his collared shirt and pressed a borrowed tie against his throat. The veterans had insisted appearance mattered. Sarge himself had ironed the shirt with the same care he once gave to Marine dress blues. Ellie and Sophie were left in Margaret's care, Valor pacing the cabin restlessly as if he knew he was being sidelined from the day's battle. Silas kissed each child's forehead, scratched Valor's ears, and whispered, "Guard them," before stepping into the brittle air. The courthouse in Anchorage was a block of concrete softened only by the flags flapping stiffly above its steps. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Silas and Parker entered a small conference room rather than a grand chamber. Family court rarely offered spectacle. The walls were beige, the carpet industrial, the table a bland U-shape designed to hold conflict without grandeur. Across from them sat Marlene. She wore a modest navy dress, her hair styled into a careful bun, makeup applied with precision to cover exhaustion. She avoided Silas's eyes, her fingers twisting tissues in her lap. Beside her was her attorney, Elizabeth Thorne. Thorne was in her mid-40s, tall, her dark hair cut in a severe bob, eyes sharp as glass. Her suit was slate gray, tailored without flaw, Her nails painted a glossy red that signaled both control and warning. She had built a career on divorces, specializing in turning her clients into victims and the other side into shadows of monsters. Raised in a broken home in Chicago, she had once sworn she would never be powerless like her mother, who had lost custody of her children to a wealthy, indifferent father. That wound had sharpened her. In every case, she fought as if defeating the ghost of her own past. She greeted Parker with a thin smile, but when her gaze landed on Silas, it carried calculation, as though she had already written his story before hearing him speak. Judge Helen Davis entered. She was 60, with iron gray hair pulled into a bun, rimmed glasses perched low, and a voice clipped with authority. Her reputation was of a pragmatist who prized order, documentation, and above all, stability. Years of adjudicating cases had left her skeptical of emotional theatrics. She scanned the room, eyes unreadable, before calling the session to order. Thorne opened with a steady rhythm. She painted Silas as a soldier returning broken from war, unemployed, unstable, unprepared to raise children alone. She presented selective images: a photograph of Silas in uniform looking stern and battle-worn, a spliced video clip of him in the storm clutching his daughters, his face gaunt, his voice desperate. "Your Honor," she said smoothly, "this is not malice, it is instability. My client only wishes her daughters raised in a home with steady income, familiar walls, and a mother's guidance." Her tone was velvet, but every phrase was a blade. Parker rose without drama. He laid the binder of evidence neatly before the judge. He presented Silas's daily childcare log pages of times, meals, temperatures, medical notes. He handed up Margaret's affidavit, notarized in Sparenit's language. He submitted Dr. Guyon's medical report, attesting to the children's stress but improved care. Finally, he placed Keisha Blair's letter describing Valor's therapeutic role. "Your Honor, my client has not only provided care, he has created structure. Every entry is evidence. Every witness statement corroborates. He is not a soldier unstable. He is a father who records, plans, and protects." As Parker spoke, Silas sat silent, hands folded, his eyes fixed on the judge. He felt his throat tighten when photographs appeared. Images of Ellie and Sophie asleep with Valor curled between them, their small faces relaxed for the first time in days. For Silas, those pictures were sacred. For Thorne, they were dismissed with a shrug. "A dog, Your Honor, however loyal, cannot substitute for stable employment or financial resources," she countered. The judge listened, expression carved from stone. Finally, she leaned forward. "Mr. Morgan, you have demonstrated admirable effort. However, the court must weigh long-term stability. At this moment, you are without permanent employment, and your housing is temporary. By contrast, Mrs. Morgan maintains steady work and retains the marital home. While there are concerns regarding her past conduct, the law requires I consider which environment appears most stable today." Her voice was final before the words fully landed. "Therefore, temporary custody is awarded to the mother. Mr. Morgan will have supervised visitation twice weekly, 2 hours per session." The gavel tapped. A sound no louder than wood on wood, but to Silas it thundered. His chest hollowed. He caught a flicker of triumph pass over Marlene's lips, quickly hidden. Thorne's smile barely curved. Parker placed a steady hand on Silas's shoulder and whispered, "One battle, not the war." 30 days. Later that week, Silas arrived at the Family Visitation Center, a sterile building smelling of disinfectant and bureaucracy. The playroom had plastic toys stacked in bins, bright murals on the walls, and a table where a social worker sat with clipboard in hand. Mrs. Gable was in her early 50s, African-American, with kind eyes behind thick glasses, but a professional distance that came from years of watching fractured families try to stitch themselves for an hour at a time. She explained the rules: all interactions observed, no physical altercations, notes recorded. When Marlene entered with Ellie and Sophie, Silas's heart lurched. The girls looked neat, hair combed, dresses pressed, but their smiles did not reach their eyes. They ran into his arms anyway, clutching him with the desperation of children who knew time was rationed. He held them close, inhaling the familiar scent of their hair, whispering words he could not fit into 2 hours. Valor brought only on Parker's petition that his presence was integral to the girls' well-being, strained at the leash as he saw them. His tail wagged hard, his chest rumbling with eager whines. But Mrs. Gable raised her hand. The dog must stay by the wall. The leash was clipped short, holding Valor just feet away. He stood, ears high, tail sweeping the floor, eyes locked on the twins. Ellie stretched a hand toward him. Sophie whispered his name. Valor, her voice breaking. Both began to cry when the leash pulled taut, keeping the dog from reaching them. Valor pawed at the floor, then lay down, his body pressed as far forward as the restraint allowed, head on his paws, whining low and steady. The room filled with the sound of the children sobbing, reaching, the dog answering. Silas held them, his throat raw. He looked at the social worker, hoping she saw what the judge had, not that bond unmeasured by salaries or mortgages. Mrs. Gable's eyes softened as she scribbled in her notes, though her expression remained neutral. When the session ended, handing the girls back felt worse than any battlefield farewell. They clung, their tears soaking his shirt, until they were pried away. Valor barked once, sharp and pained, before being silenced by the handler. Silas walked out into the gray winter light, his hands empty but his resolve sharper. He had lost this round, but every sob, every note, every photograph was fuel. He would not stop until the truth outweighed the fiction. The days following the court's decision stretched long and gray. Silas drove the 2 hours allowed each week to the family visitation center, only to hold Ellie and Sophie for what felt like minutes before being forced to surrender them back. Valor paced restlessly every time the children left, pressing his nose against the door, as if memorizing the path they had taken. Silas filled his journal with precise entries, meals prepared, medicines bought, income applications filed, but his nights were restless. Even Parker's calm reminders of 30 days until review could not silence the sense that the system had already branded him unfit. One icy afternoon, Silas returned to his small apartment to find a heavy envelope tucked into the mail slot. It bore the seal of a law office in Fairbanks. He frowned, slid it open at the kitchen table, and read. His breath caught. The letter was formal but unmistakable. His grandfather, Henry Morgan, had passed, and by last will and testament had left his estate 200 acres of farmland, livestock, a modest ranch house, and financial holdings to Silas, his only surviving heir. Memories stirred as he set the letter down. Henry Morgan had been a towering figure of his childhood, broad-shouldered with a slow gait shaped by years of farming and a voice that carried quiet authority. He had fought in World War II, returned to Alaska to build a ranch from frozen earth, and lived the rest of his life as if duty were stitched into his bones. Silas remembered visiting the farm as a boy, the smell of hay, the creak of wooden floors, the rare but powerful warmth of his grandfather's hand on his shoulder. That heritage now lived in him. The next morning, Silas drove north with Valor in the passenger seat, the girls' empty car seats behind him like echoes. The road to Fairbanks stretched icy and endless, but the closer he came, the more he felt something shift. The land opened into rolling white fields, spruce trees etched against the horizon, barns standing stubborn against time. When he turned onto the long gravel drive, the farmhouse came into view, aged but steady, smoke curling from its chimney as though welcoming him. Waiting on the porch was Robert Halverson, the executor of Henry's estate. Robert was in his early 60s, a broad-shouldered man with Norwegian roots, his beard thick and white, his eyes pale blue and weather-creased. He had farmed the neighboring land for 40 years and promised Henry to handle affairs when the time came. "You carry his look," Robert said, clasping Silas's hand. "Henry always said you'd find your footing here." Robert walked him through the ranch, the barns, the winter fields, the herd of cattle penned against the cold. In the study, he handed Silas an envelope written in Henry's firm script. The words were simple, direct. "This land cost me sweat, but it gave me purpose. You, Silas, no sacrifice. Let this land anchor you. Build here what war and loss tried to take from you. Make it a home for those who need one." Silas folded the letter carefully, feeling its weight more than paper. Valor padded through each room of the farmhouse, sniffing, mapping, then settling near the hearth as if he too sensed they had found a new post. For the first time in months, Silas felt air move through his lungs without the weight of despair. News of the inheritance spread quickly. Parker called that evening, his tone edged with restrained satisfaction. "This changes everything," he said. "You're no longer a transient father in a rented apartment. You're a landowner, financially secure. The court will see stability now. We'll petition immediately." In contrast, across town, Marlene sat in the house that had once been Silas's. Her companion, Mark, had already left her, taking what little savings she had. When she read the headline in the local paper, "Veteran inherits grandfather's ranch estate," her face paled. The man she had cast out as broken now stood on ground stronger than her own. The final hearing arrived. Snow glimmered beneath a rare shaft of sun as Silas entered the courthouse, Parker by his side. This time he carried not just logs and affidavits, but deeds, bank statements, and a business plan for Morgan Ranch's restoration. Elizabeth Thorne, still sharp and poised, studied the documents with a flicker of unease. Marlene herself was absent, leaving Thorne to deliver the inevitable. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "my client withdraws her petition for custody. She concedes legal and physical custody to Mr. Morgan." Judge Davis, eyes weary but resolute, confirmed the ruling. The gavel struck. This time the sound did not hollow Silas. It rang like the unlocking of chains. Full custody was his. When Silas stepped outside, the winter sun caught the tears on his face and turned them into prisms. Margaret stood waiting with the twins, Ellie and Sophie bundled in heavy coats. They ran into his arms, Valor bounding ahead to circle them, barking with a joy that echoed across the courthouse steps. Parker watched with a faint smile, and even Sarge, leaning on the rail, brushed a hand across his eyes. Weeks later, the ranch was alive with new sounds. The barns creaked with repairs as veterans hammered and sawed, their laughter rising with the smell of cut wood. Ellie and Sophie explored the snowy fields, their boots leaving twin trails, Valor racing ahead, doubling back, always within reach. A wooden sign was raised at the entrance, "Morgan's Haven, a home for fathers and children." The idea had grown from Silas's heart and from his grandfather's final letter. Not every father returned from war to a home. Not every child had a mother who stayed. So this place would be more than his refuge. It would be a sanctuary for others. Apartments converted from barns, a communal garden, a playground where children of veterans could laugh without shadows. One evening, as the sun dipped pink over the fields, Silas stood with Ellie on his left, Sophie on his right, Valor at his feet. The air smelled of wood smoke and promise. "This is home now," he told them. Ellie squeezed his hand. Sophie whispered into Valor's ear, and the shepherd wagged his tail as if he understood. The long storm had broken. Light from a new land spread across the snow. As the gavel fell and the courtroom emptied, Silas stepped into the sunlight, holding Ellie and Sophie in his arms. Valor sprinted across the snow. What began as betrayal and loss had become a home, a family, and a new mission. His grandfather's letter had given him not only land, but a purpose. And from that purpose, Morgan's Haven was born, a place where no father or son would be left alone in the storm. This story reminds us that even in the darkest winters, there can be a dawn if we hold on to love and resilience. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe that families are built by blood or by the courage of those who choose to stay? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this journey touches your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, healing, and the strong bond between humans and the loyal animals who have always accompanied them.